Welcome to Channel 24. Dr. Jade McGlynn, author and academic at King's College London, is joining us right away. Welcome, Jade.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Jade, so I cannot ignore what happened yesterday in the Oval Office. The way President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance behaved. What was your first reaction? How did it look to you?
My first reaction naturally was, oh no, because clearly everybody would have preferred that the meeting had gone well. And then as I sort of built myself up to watch the video, which I had to watch in a few stages because it made me feel rather angry and aghast, like it did, I think, to the vast majority of people in Britain as well. Shock, I think, total shock and total sympathy for President Zelensky, and also I think as time went on, a real understanding that he had been set up. And I understand why some people are saying, oh well, he should have held his tongue or kept calm. But I think realistically, he was being baited and he was being set up, and clearly the minerals deal that they had prepared was little more than a capitulation deal, which he could not have gone back to. He has to return to Ukraine, so he can't just come back with a capitulation deal. I'm not really sure that they left him with many options. I think it was a trap, and I think actually through his behaviour and calling out their lies, he managed to somewhat escape the trap and to try to let the truth in rather than allow purveyors of disinformation from both sides of the Atlantic, both Russia and the United States, to box him in and present him as a warmonger. At least this way he was able to give his version of events, which also does happen to be the empirically truer version of events.
Yeah, you know, Jade, when you're opening social media right now, every Ukrainian is a diplomatic expert right now, this night and this day. So basically, I'm curious how we could possibly avoid that situation. Because yes, lots of people saying it was planned, and yes, Zelensky was set up. But what Ukrainian delegation missed in all these signs, messages? Or it was so well planned by Washington, by Trump and his administration?
I mean, to a certain extent, I don't know how useful an exercise it is to go back, but I think Trump has always been a highly unpredictable man and politician, and I think the way that J.D. Vance was there as well, perhaps it could have been easier if President Zelensky had another representative of the government alongside with him, or perhaps, I mean, another option would have been for him to just stay silent and say no comment. But ultimately, I think that those very same qualities of defiance that enabled him and all Ukrainian, well, the vast majority of Ukrainians to stand up to, the world's largest nuclear power on the 24th of February, also probably make it very hard to just turn into a lickspittle, and say to Trump whatever it is that he wants to hear and flatter his ego whilst you're being accused of continuing a war that actually you're just trying to exist and to survive. So I think whilst it's easy to judge from afar, we also don't know all of the elements of this. We don't know exactly what was in the third iteration of the minerals deal. We don't know, what had been happening, what he had been led on to believe. Clearly, something has gone terribly wrong, but I think I'm not inclined to blame President Zelensky for what has gone wrong. I think that first and foremost, something has gone terribly morally wrong in the United States.
Yeah, I personally feel so much empathy to him because I was not there at that Oval cabinet, so I don't know how would I react on everything, on all that blames that were happening. Yes, and after a moment after everything was happening in Washington, D.C., lots of European leaders started to post on social media that they are standing with Ukraine. Do you think this situation, shock situation in the United States could make our allies more united and speed up their help, what do you think should be their next step for the next step of our partners?
So I think, yes, I think that most people had already sort of realized that there was trouble. I think the question was, how long did Europe have to really get its act together? And Friday night was helpful in the sense that it showed that they do not have very long at all. That creates problems because Europe isn't ready to defend itself. However, there's lots that Europe could do, Europe including the UK, but for these purposes, not including Ukraine, all of Europe kind of except for Ukraine. There's a lot they could do in terms of what they should do. Obviously, they're meeting, and it's nice to be united, but we need to go beyond declarative statements. We need to get into action. For my part, I think that sort of combat, air patrols, sort of policing of central and western Ukraine to at least allow the economy to recover a little bit, to take some of the load off of the Ukrainian Air Force, off of Ukrainian forces, off of Ukrainian air defense, so it can focus its resources, in those areas in the east, like where I am now, where they're more needed. And also, I think it would be a considerable morale boost, not only to Ukraine, but also to Europe, to show, actually, we're a very rich continent. And if we want to, we can defend ourselves. Yes, there needs to be some decoupling, to put it euphemistically, from the US. That is not going to happen overnight and will have to be carefully managed, particularly in the case of Great Britain, where I'm from. But nevertheless, there are things we can do on our own. And this sort of air policing, such as has been done previously around the Baltics, would be a really great place to start, and I think a real vote of confidence as well for Ukrainians that Europeans are as good as their word.
Do you think Europe is ready to defend itself?
I don't think it's currently capable of fully defending itself against, let's say, a Russian invasion. Luckily for Europe, and tragically for Ukraine, Ukrainians have been weakening the Russian army, the Russian economy. Russia is not in a state right now to be launching any kind of conventional warfare. It couldn't protect its ally, Assad. Of course, Russia will always resort to hybrid means and political warfare. But right now, Europe doesn't need to defend itself beyond defending Ukraine. By defending Ukraine, it does defend itself. And I think that deep down, most European leaders recognize that, but they've been trying hard for a really long time to not have to acknowledge and act on the consequences of that, of what that means. And that means genuinely, revamping defense industrial complexes, investing a la the Danish model in Ukrainian production, because Ukrainians are the only ones who know how to fight a war of this type. And I think it means climbing off everybody's high horses and actually listening to Ukrainians, because whilst there are some things, particularly around NATO styles of command and respect for soldiers' individuality and lives, that I think Western European countries still do have to share with Ukraine, I actually think there's probably at this point a hell of a lot more that Ukraine can share about war and train us in than vice versa.
Yeah, because on the third anniversary of Russian invasion to Ukraine, you were presenting at some conference dedicated to that, and I've heard your amazing speech. And you said the quote, probably I'm mistaken, like literally, but what you said, like, no one's gonna defend you better than yourself. Can you elaborate more on? I know you just said something about that, but could you please elaborate more on that?
I think that Ukraine should take all the help it can get, but ultimately nobody's going to defend Ukraine better than Ukrainians. And ultimately, I think the focus should be on developing your own industry. Yes, working with allies, always work with allies. But I think understanding that ultimately, your defense is probably going to come down to yourself in the ultimate end, unless we do start to see a real change or an injection of spirit and character into European countries. To that end, I think if I were Ukrainian, I'm not, but if I were Ukrainian, I would be looking into the creation of nuclear weapons or the restoration of some parts of Ukraine's nuclear arsenal that, of course, it gave up under security guarantees from my country, for which we must bear great shame, and from the Americans, who should also bear great shame, but I think they perhaps might be beyond shame at this point.
Yeah, but it may take us an ages to make a weapon.
Yes. So if we think about, for example, one of the reasons why I'm so keen on a Sky Shield and combat air patrols is because that will then provide both the security, of course, for the ramping up of the industrial of defence production, but and of course for some economic rejuvenation, let's say by opening Lviv and perhaps even Kiev airports, though that would probably be later on into the sort of development of the programme. But also because it would take between 3 to 5 years with quite intensive training for the Ukrainian Air Force, and considerable investment. But luckily, we do have 300 billion in frozen Russian assets that perhaps could be used one of these times. And considerable investment in order for Ukrainian Air Force to be able to patrol its own skies. But I think that the focus of any help that Europe provides, and I think that Europe should be providing much, much more help, but I think it should always be with the aim that Ukraine can then sustain its own defence and also teach us, because bluntly, Ukraine is the only country capable of that has experience and has shown it's capable of fighting Russia. And also we need to start thinking more generally about nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, I'm very sad to say this, in Europe, because we've seen that nuclear blackmail works. We've seen that it works for Putin. And unfortunately, we're now going to enter a period of most likely of incredible nuclear proliferation, where all states, look and take their lessons from this war and think, okay, well, this bigger state next to me that has some territorial ambitions or a weird existential obsession with my existence, they keep on threatening me. They have nuclear weapons. Well, I look at what's happened to Ukraine, and you know what? We're going to need to start developing nuclear weapons as well. So unfortunately, this de-escalatory policy that was pursued particularly by Jake Sullivan and also by Joe Biden, I think will end up having quite the opposite effect of actually leading to nuclear proliferation.
Yeah, unfortunately. And yes, Jade, lots of people may not know, but just tell our viewers, where are you based right now? You're in Kharkiv, as far as I understood. And what brought you there? How is life there at the recent time?
It's funny because one of my friends from the UK messaged me about something to do with Parliament, and he was asking, "Oh, I didn't realise you were in Kharkiv again. Like, are you okay? I heard about the drone attacks." And I said, "Yes, I'm fine. I'm sorry, I can't reply properly though because I'm at the nail salon." And he said, "Oh, you don't understand how happy I am that nail salons are still working." I was like, "Still working? They're completely full." Don't worry, the nail salons in Kharkiv are as unbreakable as the city, I think. But yes, life continues as normal. I mean, there's something about Kharkiv that I honestly don't know what would have to happen to this place for there to not be, for the people of Kharkiv to not still cling on to that sense of normality. Sometimes they're really clinging on by their fingernails, it seems, but they cling on nevertheless. What brought me here? Well, it's a mixture of kind of personal reasons and practical reasons. So I've always loved Kharkiv since I first came here many, many years ago. And then, of course, on the 24th of February, sitting in London, watching everything, I genuinely thought I would never ever see Kharkiv again. And I was so heartbroken. And so now I base myself half of my time here, and in part just out of sheer gratitude and gratitude to the people of Kharkiv and to all of those Ukrainians who contributed to the fight, that I'm still able to visit this wonderful city, which is battered and bruised and a bit boarded up, but it's still Kharkiv. So it's partly that kind of emotional sort of love, I suppose, for the city. But it's also practical reasons in that I research the occupied territories. And of course, when I first started sort of coming back to Kharkiv in 2023, it was, not so very long after the deoccupation of Kharkivshina, and I was able to, it was helpful to be able to go to those places to do field work. And also I have a number of good friends in Kharkiv who are able to help me. And that's always nice, especially, in the sort of conditions that one has out here, where it's nice to know that you have friends that you trust around you. Say, for example, last night when, there's a pretty intense Shahed attack, it's just nice to know that you're sort of that you have lots of friends that you can call on if all of a sudden you may need them, because in Kharkiv you may very well need them.
Did you adapt somehow?
Look, I don't know. I think people in Kharkiv are still far less. I don't know. I guess everybody's different. I still feel very frightened when I can hear the Shaheds flying. It's more when they're flying. It's not so much the bangs, but just because you don't know if they might fly to your house. I think that probably people here who live here constantly all the time, and certainly those who stayed throughout those awful first months of 2022, are a lot hardier than I am. But yeah, inevitably it's scary. But I think it's scary for everybody when things go boom. And I don't. It's a choice that I willingly make. Kharkiv is my second home now, but it's not. I'm not from Kharkiv. I don't have to be here. I willingly make this choice to come here. And I think that it's helpful. Well, I would obviously rather not experience it, but I think it's helpful for me to experience it because, when I go back to the UK, a big part of my role at King's College London is to advise ministers, politicians, to write strategies, to write kind of policy advice. And really, what right would I have to do that without understanding and being somewhere like Kharkiv, and traveling around and traveling into Donetsk region, to Zaporizhia, and talking to people and hearing their thoughts? What right would I have to give that advice if I was just sitting in London? I don't think I would have that right. We're talking about people's lives that have every much that just as much worth as somebody in London or in Washington's lives, and certainly just as much worth, if not more, given how much they've contributed in this city to my life. So I feel like as a researcher and advisor, I sort of have a duty as well to come out here and to understand and to experience the very things that I'm talking about and advising on.
Yeah, as a Ukrainian soldier saying, you will never be ready to the war, and you will never be adapt to the war. So I think something is there. But also, Jade, I would love to speak and to talk with you not only about the disrespectful behavior of Trump's and Jade Vance regarding Zelensky, but also about Russian propaganda. I know it never stops, and you are researching this matter for a long time. From your perspective, what messages in Russian propaganda now is spreading, especially regardless what's happening on the nearest months, I guess? Probably they are drinking champagne in Kremlin.
It's weird because there's a mixture, particularly among the more nationalist, the so-called sort of Z bloggers. There you have a real unease with coming to terms with the idea of being friends with America. And there's a real mistrust that I think is reflected as well among certain sections of the Siloviki and the sort of the security forces there's something amiss here. You should never, if you are a Russian sort of propagandist or brought up to those lines, the first thing you would know is to never trust the Anglo-Saxon. So they're sticking with that. But on the other hand, yes, there's also a lot of gloating, a lot of jeering at Ukraine. It's pretty difficult in general, I read a lot of this stuff. I've read it for well over a decade, in particular in relation to Ukraine. But even I, in recent days, have found some of it hard to stomach. But ultimately, I mean, they always had these sorts of attitudes towards Ukraine of, you know, who do you think you are? You know, you stay in your place, don't get ideas above your station. And so they see Trump's behavior as sort of reiterating their belief that Ukrainians are, I suppose, like of a second rate or a second sort, and, you know, have got too big for their boots. And therefore, of course, they take glee in the humiliation of Ukrainians, particularly, I suppose, as they haven't been able to humiliate Ukrainians. Quite the opposite. The second army of the world was quite openly humiliated here in Ukraine by a country that, let's be blunt, did not have anywhere near the same kind of manpower, and still does not, and did not really have any support, barring a few NLAWs and a couple of javelins from the West. So,
Dr. Jade McGlynn, author and academic at King's College London, was with us. Thank you very much, Jade, for your deep